My name is Jack Heritage. I'm a karate instructor from the Cotswolds.
And I am Patrick Woodward, amateur enthusiast and practitioner of a various number of martial arts styles.
And welcome to the Armchair Combatives podcast.
So today, Jack, I want to talk about old school cool. Is it, I want to hesitate to say better, practice an ancient style of martial arts that's had thousands of years to develop? We're talking kung fu, we're talking maybe judo, we're talking these kinds of, kendo. That's things that have been around since people started writing things down. Or is there more merit and weight in these modern combative systems that you see popping up? Things that get used for current military service, special forces training, Krav Maga, Aikido, which people seem to forget, is a very modern martial art on the face of things. Aikido has only really been around since the start of the 20th century. So, to kick things off, in your mind, does a martial art need a solid cultural foundation? Let's start there.
Honestly, I don't think so. It's one of those things where I think sometimes people, when training a new martial art for the first time, they buy into the cultural background, they buy into the tradition and the mysticism and stuff like that. Of course it's cool to train in a martial art where somebody says, oh yeah, this was passed down for generations from warrior monks that lived in the Shaolin temple. You're like, damn, that's bloody awesome. Of course I want to train that. That's great. But I think it really all depends on how it's presented in the modern day. And what I mean by that is, if you're training a traditional martial art, traditional meaning old, not new tradition, then I think if you're training it the same way that it was trained 200 years ago, in my opinion, I think you're kind of missing a trick, because things should have progressed past that point. If you're still training a martial art exactly as it was trained 200 years ago, it's likely that some of the methods are outdated. It's likely that there's better ways of doing it now. Science has come on leaps and bounds, especially sports science and stuff. So I'm sure there's better methods of getting stronger. So let me pull from my experience then of karate. So in Okinawa, and I believe places still do this, they do training called Hojo Undo, which is basically translates roughly as supplementary training. Now, their supplementary training is often strengthening of the knuckles, or increasing basically the calluses on your hands. So when you hit, you hit like you're hitting with a rock. Or they do certain weighted exercises with these old vases. I can't exactly remember what it's called, but they hold on with their fingertips, and then they do all these sanshin type movements. And it's one of those things where I can understand how it looks appealing. It's this ancient method, it was trained by the Okinawans. They do this. They hit bricks. They hit gravel and stuff. And it's you look at it and it's yeah, it's cool. It's got this kind of old school spit and sawdust feel. But I think when you look at it, it's surely there's got to be a better way in a modern approach, personally. When you look at things like the makiwara, if you guys are unfamiliar with what makiwara is, it basically translates as wooden rope, and it's an old school version of a pad or a bag, and it's basically cemented into the floor, and karate guys especially just hit these rope covered wood panels, and it's all supposed to be to do with strengthening the knuckles, increasing the feedback with your punches and stuff, which is nothing wrong with. I've used them in the past. I've ended up with really sore knuckles to the point where it's kind of painful. And do I really think that's better than a spot pad? Probably not. Is it better than a heavy bag? I'd probably argue no. But there is something in it that just feels more, like you say, it's traditional. It just feels like you're a part of this ancient martial art, opposed to this modern interpretation. And I don't know how you feel about that, Pat, because I know you've trained traditional martial arts too. Based on just training and enjoying training, do you prefer hitting things like spot pads, or would you prefer hitting wooden dummies from Wing Chun and stuff like that? What's kind of your opinion on it?
I will say there is something really, really enticing and almost a little bit romantic, I guess might be the word, of using something like a really nicely made wooden dummy. Just like the feedback you get in your arms, the sounds it makes. There is a real you do feel like really wrapped up in like, oh, I'm learning this ancient practice. I'm unlocking the secrets. And I will say, I completely agree on the point of people get enamored with the idea of, I'm practicing a tradition that's been passed down through the last 10 generations of martial artists. I think you also do make a valid point in the sense of training on something like a wooden dummy. The reason why it's survived so long throughout the years is because with the forms that you are given in arts like Wing Chun or other types of Kung Fu like Gocho, there are, those are the wooden dummy is meant to represent the stance of a fighter. If you didn't know that already, so obviously you've got like the two crossed arms, which is supposed to represent someone's guard, and then you've got the outside sort of the offward post, which is meant to represent somebody's lead leg, and then you obviously have the main pillar, which is the body. And the idea is you learn how to strike and move around somebody from there. It's a great solo training tool, if nothing else, then because it's engaging. Like I remember I was training in the old when I was training at Total Martial Arts, they had two on the wall, and I'm not being funny. In favor of going and hitting the heavy bag for an hour, I went and trained on the wooden dummy for an hour because the feedback you get is nice. The way you learn to move is nice. It's a much better visualization tool than a heavy bag, because I think something that I can't remember who said it, but it was somebody we were talking to. When you're on the heavy bag, it might have been Jamie Clubb actually, goes, when you're on the heavy bag, when you're doing your shadow boxing, when you're using your pad work, you need to visualize what you're doing. You can't just go through the motions because you're not actually creating association in your brain. And the wooden dummy is an excellent training tool for that exact purpose. In terms of with the advancement of modern technology and modern materials, modern understandings of the body and things like that, I don't think using something like a makiwara is necessarily better or worse than, like you say, using a spot pad or a heavy bag. But I think if we go too far in that direction, we're getting more into how knowledgeable is your teacher rather than how updated is your equipment, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So yes. I remember I went to a seminar by Paulo Rubio, he's part of Paquita Tertia, and he's got his own knife defense system. And there was a little WhatsApp group for if you guys want to talk to me about anything, if you guys want a refresher on anything, just let me know. And I remember we did a couple of videos, and I put them into this group. I'm like, what do you guys think? Give me some critique, give me some feedback, that kind of thing. And there was one move that I did while we were messing around. And he goes you need to make sure you go on the outside of the arm because you're dangerously close to cutting your own brachial artery, which is the artery that runs kind of from the armpit to the crook of the elbow in the underside of the arm. And obviously, as little as 100 years ago, Filipino martial arts teachers wouldn't have known what a brachial artery was. In terms of, they would have known if you cut somebody on the underside of the arm, they'll bleed to death in X amount of minutes, so you should aim there. Yeah. Because that's something that they figured out 1,000 years ago, let alone 100. But it's very much, it's the understanding of muscle, that's kind of when you get into the understanding of, is your teacher or the person you are learning from versed in the kind of modern science and modern medicine that accompanies martial arts rather than the art itself. So I think that's almost a different topic, if that makes sense. And I don't want to get too far off track.
Yeah. I was going to say, Pat, one of the things that I find with traditional martial arts, I think sometimes the thing that kind of bothers me sometimes about the way that it's sometimes approached is that with some teachers, you get this kind of gatekeeping of it has to be done this way because it has always been done this way. And I think it all depends on why you're doing it. I think if you're doing it for the sake of okay, this is done this way because it's traditional and we're respecting the culture, and you're understanding that that's the only reason why you're doing it, I think that's totally okay. Like, as an example, like one of the things where, like, not all clubs do this, but like I've been to clubs where, you know, you do the proper bow when you start. So not only just like a small ray with your hands by the sides and bow to your, you know, partner or group or whatever, but like the proper, like, on the floor, onigashimasu, you know, head to the floor, up. Then you might do some moxu, you might do some like meditation kind of stuff before you start the class. And like for me, like in a Western culture, that feels really weird. Like I find that quite difficult to kind of get on board with, because it's just not a part of our, like, it's not a part of what we do as like Westerners. But like I can understand why clubs do it, because it makes them feel closer to the base martial art. And I think if they're doing it just for the cultural interest of going like, hey, look, I really like this because culturally I think it's nice respect. It's a nice, like, what's the word I'm going to use? Homage is what I'm going to call it, to how things were originally done. I can totally understand it. I think the only time that traditionalists can kind of get a little bit out of hand is when you're doing something that's not combative, it's not useful, and you're saying that it has to be done because it's traditional, without really considering whether it's useful to your students or yourself, if it's just something that you're training with yourself. So, and I'm sure you've seen some of this kind of stuff as well in like in Wing Chun and other kind of like traditional styles. Like I think I've especially seen it in karate, where, you know, you ask the question like, why do we do it like this, and your instructor will just say, it's this is how we do it. It's just, this is how it's done.
It's a real, yeah.
So you go on.
No, I was going to say that's a real pet peeve of mine, because
Yes.
because I think even, you know, coming from a teacher especially, I think there's a real humility in saying I don't actually know, or, you know, just admitting like I'm not quite sure. However, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'll go away and have a look, because obviously a lot of these guys don't want to be seen as this kind of ineffable source of knowledge, don't they? But I think I really do appreciate these little nuggets of tradition that you do see mixed in, because it's like there is something really nice. So when I was doing Aikido, we would do, as you would call it, maybe the full ray. So we would kneel, you know, you'd kneel, and it was very much the placement, you know, left hand, right hand, you form the certain shape with your hands, you bow. Great part of that, and as you would rise, you would do this, like, you know, there would be like a salutation in Japanese, and then you'd clap, and you kind of hear all these students, and it would kind of resonate within the room. And it was explained as like the sort of spiritual side of it, or the mystical side of it, is you're clearing the room of bad energy to give yourself this nice, clean, free space within which to learn. And it's really up to you how much you invest in that kind of thing. But it was always a nice, at the very least, it was a way of going, right, none of the small talk, none of that. Now we're here to learn. Now we're here to focus. And you did, you know, just from a bow and just from a simple clap, you felt energized and like ready to go, you know?
Yeah, I could totally get that.
So I think it's important. I think these little motions of like these little salutations, I've done them in Filipino martial arts. I've done them in Muay Thai. I think they are really nice to keep these traditions alive, and to keep the understanding of like this is something that has been passed down to us, even if it's, you know, even if it's like something like Krav Maga that's not been around for eons, or, you know, one of these modern combative systems that's being developed for the military or something like that. There should be something in there just to give a nod to the people that created it for you, essentially, to keep you safe, to keep you active, to keep you alive, depending on why you're training. And I think those little instances are really, really important. And I'm also gonna, you know, I won't lie. It does feel, like you say, it does feel a bit mystical. It does feel a little bit martial arts movie. It does feel a little bit like I'm tapping into the ancient secrets of the East, or whatever, you know, however you want to feel about it.
Yeah.
I think there are definitely reasons to keep this alive. I think on the flip side of that, it is a purely it is a self indulgent thing. So I remember I went to an Aikido seminar, and the guy everyone's there in their white gis and their hakamas, and everyone looks very, very traditional, very buff. And the guy comes out and he's wearing a black tracksuit. And there was kind of a bit of, a bit of tension, I would almost say, in the room. And he goes like, right, so the first thing I always need to address when coming to hardcore Aikidoka is what I'm wearing. He gestures down. And he goes, I've never really invested in the gi, because to me, a group of white guys in central London wearing gis feels a little bit like going to the American embassy in Tokyo and seeing a bunch of Japanese guys walking around in Stetsons and chaps with six guns going, howdy partner. It just, it just feels a little bit gratuitous to me. And I've never really invested in it. But it's something I always need to address. And he kind of said it in a way that was a bit like, because you always bring it up. So that was kind of an understanding of, actually, yeah, do I need to wear a gi to come to karate? Could I get away with, as we kind of said, the much more modern athletic wear that is, probably a lot less hot, a lot less sweaty, probably slightly less restricting in certain ways. The gi is something that's rooted in tradition, but you feel crisp wearing a gi, don't you? Brand new gi.
It's interesting you say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can totally understand what you're saying, because it's like a lot of this stuff, it just feels good. And it's hard to explain exactly why it feels good, because it's something that's completely different to our culture, maybe. Maybe it's because it's just like, I feel a part of like this kind of like group. I feel like a part of a community. Like, hey, look, we all wear a matching uniform. We all do the same salutations at the beginning of the session. We all have this common interest. Like, I think, we've talked about this in previous episodes, but it is very tribal, right? I think, all of these different things. Like, it's like when you go to school, right? You all have the same blazer. I'm a part of this tribe of students. I don't know if you ever went on a school trip and you're there in your blazer, your shorts, whatever you might be wearing, like it's hot summer day, it's taken into account, right? And you're on this school trip and you see another school with different school uniform. Automatically, those motherfuckers are your enemies, your mortal enemies. You look over like, oh, from a different school. Come on, fight me! Come on, I dare you! Come over and mess with the Camden boys.
We clearly went to very different schools, Jack. Sorry, but
didn't get a lot done on the field trips. Let's just say that.
Too busy going to war with Camden School.
going to war with other schools. But I think the same kind of principle applies. And I think maybe this is why there's so much contention between like traditional martial arts. It's like you look at things like Wing Chun or like Kung Fu versus karate or Aikido versus this, wherever it might be, and it's all like, hey, look, we have our own style, our own uniforms, our own this, our own that, and we've been wearing it for like years and years and years. And I think if you were to take those people out of those, like, I'm going to call them costumes, but I'm going to call them that. I know a lot of people are like, no, they're combative, useful pieces of clothing. Okay, right, they're costumes, right? It's a costume for Muay Thai, there's a costume for karate. They're not always the most practical, okay? Like you mentioned, gis get very, very hot in summer. And don't get me wrong, it's a useful piece of clothing to grab hold of. I think it's better than ripping your t-shirt every week, especially if you're doing a lot of wrestling and grappling. But there probably is better things like rash guards and shorts. Okay, like we've found that out. Like, look at MMA. Like those guys mix everything in their sessions, and you won't catch one guy in a gi. Because funnily enough, they've realised probably not the most practical. I think if you were to take everybody out of their, like, I'm going to call, once again, costumes, and just put them all in rash guards, you'd probably find out that we have a lot more in common between traditional martial arts than we have separate. On that note, then, we're talking about like more modern interpretations. Then, we've talked a lot about the traditional. Modern interpretations, things like MMA, which for me is, I always think MMA like 90s, I think is like when the UFC kind of like started kicking up. That's when I think of this kind of like big takeover. And I think it was like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu especially kind of like began this big trend of change. I think mixing the martial arts has been one of the more interesting things to come out of the last like 30, 40 years. Just based on the fact that we're beginning to see a little bit more pressure testing of everything that's kind of like combative or supposedly combative. And I'm going to use supposedly because there's a lot of things that people have found don't actually work. And I think for that reason, I think when it comes down to actually testing what we do, I'd like to say modern interpretations can be a lot better. And, I find that, like, some of the martial arts stuff that I've been learning over the last few years, like karate stuff, you try it in a more grappling or wrestling approach, it just doesn't work. And you're like, why doesn't it work? Is it because I'm not very good at the technique, or is it because it just doesn't doesn't work in this context? And I think when you start pressure testing, especially traditional martial arts, and pressure testing them in a way which takes them out of their own sparring methodology, you begin to realize that, okay, there's some key principles here that were maybe missing from this traditional martial art in the first place. Because if I was to go up against like a Greco-Roman wrestler using only like karate's interpretation of grappling, I'm going to get like suplexed in about 5 seconds. And I think it's just interesting to see how traditional martial arts actually do apply to those contexts, and if they do, because they don't always do that. Like, you've come to train with me with Jamie and stuff over doing his workshops that are more MMA based or wrestling based or groundwork based, and it is interesting to see that there's clear differences in the way that those guys train, especially with how practical they make it from the offset. And I think that's actually a testament to modern interpretations of martial arts and combative systems, because, in a karate class, like the first things you'd learn is like you'd be stood in lines and you'd be like, okay, you need to learn how to do a head block, you need to learn how to do a down block, and you need to learn how to do a straight punch. And it's like, that's great, but I'm doing it in the air. Like, I'm not learning how to hit anything. I'm not understanding feedback. I'm not understanding of how my partner's moving. So in terms of your experience of training martial arts that are more traditional and then training martial arts that are more hands-on practical from day dot, which one do you feel like you have taken more away from that's combative?
Oh, so I think this is kind of where, again, we're getting into a whole sticky situation of if I had to pick one martial art that was like prepared me for a sparring match in the shortest amount of time, it would be Muay Thai. Because
I actually worded that out as you were saying it. I was like,
yeah,
like he's going to say Muay Thai.
He's going to Muay Thai, and it's like, and again, so like with the Muay Thai, they've got, you go back to the whole idea of the uniform or the costume or whatever. It's kind of like in training, everyone was in their rash guards and their Adidas shorts and their trainers and stuff. Well, actually, no trainers because we were on barefoot, but you know what I mean. Everyone turned up in gym wear, but as soon as there was like a contest, it was like out come the shiny shorts and the armbands and the headbands, and everyone looks, everyone looks like they're ready to go. But it's that thing of if you want to look at something that's like what gave me the best patterns and what gave me the best coordination, patterns would be karate. Straight away, give me a nice, easy 20-step kata, go over it a couple of times, bam, I'm in. I feel like I'm doing karate. This is great. Coordination, you got the Filipino martial arts. It's like, okay, this is actually really nice. The flow's great. I'm working on this. I feel like I can flow. I feel like I can move in this system. I don't think one martial art can ever completely prepare you for a street fight unless you go to something like a Lethwei tournament and they don't tell you what you're doing, because those guys will mess you up. But it does become this whole thing of like, it comes back to questions we've answered in previous episodes of like, what are you looking to get out of your martial art at the end of the day?
Yes.
If you want to ask a question like that. In terms of kind of going back to the point you made regarding modernized styles. So a really good example would be jiu-jitsu. So jiu-jitsu in its Japanese sense has existed in the form, since the form of the samurai, because they had taijutsu, which was their all-round fighting art that comprised the sword, the spear, the bow, fighting, grappling, throwing, locks, holds, everything they needed to survive on and off the battlefield. And then that got separated down into like, well, maybe let's just learn the sword, and that'll be kendo, and let's just learn to grapple, and that'll be jiu-jitsu, and that kind of thing. And then Brazilian jiu-jitsu is approximately just 100 years old this year, because Brazilian jiu-jitsu was officially coined by the Gracies in 1925. And it's like we had electric lights before we had Brazilian jiu-jitsu, right? Do you know what I mean? yeah, you go back to the idea of like a uniform or a costume, and this kind of dividing of like, does it create the idea of we're all doing a martial art, or does it create the idea of like it's us and them? I spoke to a guy the other day who invited me to come along to a 10th Planet jiu-jitsu session. Really nice guy. Hadn't got, nothing against him. We obviously liked each other enough that he was like, "Oh, come and do my thing that I like doing." But it's the idea of I go on the website and the first thing I see is like 10th Planet is no gi Brazilian jiu-jitsu. They could have just said come in a rash guard. They could have just said you'll need this gear for training. But they specified it's no gi Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And it's the idea of by expressly saying there's no uniform, there's a uniform. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And I think again that it's one of those things where I'm not saying they are trying to, but it's almost the idea of the episode title is Old School Cool, and these guys are too cool for school, right?
Yeah.
These guys are like, no, we've shirked all of that traditionalist nonsense, and we're just here to practice the art in its purest and simplest form. So we're just wearing our rash guards, and we're doing the techniques as they were intended to be done by Gracie, and we're going from there. And it's one of those where those guys have shirked tradition almost, but that in itself kind of makes that your tradition because you're trying to be more of a purist almost. You're trying to be like, no, we're kind of trimming all of the fat and we're focusing purely on the technique, which I don't think is a poor stance to take. But I think for me, that's where something stops being a martial art and starts being a combative system. Because it's like I said, I don't think the martial art program or the combative program that they teach to the SAS or the Navy SEALs or the Spetsnaz or whoever, I don't think they bow in at the start of class. I don't think they wear any uniform. I don't think they have a specific uniform. It's one of those. Well, obviously they have a specific uniform because they're on the army. That was dumb, but it's sorry. But it's one of those where like these guys aren't bogged down in the traditional values. They're focusing purely on like we need to make we need to make something that is as efficient as possible because this is something that we need to teach to our special forces commandos or our operatives or whatever the word they use is in literally as little time as possible, because the sooner we can get these guys trained to an acceptable level, the sooner they can go out and start doing what we need them to do.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas on the other side of things, I always like the story of Artong from Chris Murray's book Crippled Immortals, where you'd go to his little dojo. I can't remember. I can't think of the Chinese word. I think it's the Wugwan. You would have in Chinese martial arts. You'd go to his little Wugwan in the middle of Singapore, and he would go, "Oh, you want to learn my system? That's really cool. Come back in a year." Because the thought process behind that is, if you truly want to learn my system, if you truly want to develop to the level that I am at, that takes a lifetime. So what's 1 year? Go away, come back. It's that simple. Go away, and then in a year's time, come back and we'll talk. And there's a story of like there was most like 99% of people go and they don't come back, but the one guy that does come back, there's no like, who are you? It's like, I remember you. Come on in, and you can start training. And it's one of those where like that's how you differentiate somebody that wants to learn wants to learn self-defense or wants to learn a combative or wants to just keep active in a way that's fun. That's a real martial artist, because these are people, and they do exist. These are people who would devote themselves to one specific system because of its traditional values, because of its effectiveness, because of the fact that it's been passed down father to son for the last 2,000 years. And there's something really respectable about that. They might not be learning, do you know what I mean? Like on paper, they might not be learning the best system in the world. They might not be learning the most effective and efficient combative system that's ever been designed. They might not be learning the power and generation that you get if you were doing something like a special forces combative or Krav Maga, they won't be learning this, that, and the other. But there is a thing of like, these guys are developing an art. And I think that's kind of where you have kind of the very end of the spectrum, which is just like, this is almost purely an art form, and I'm willing to devote my life to it.
I think one of the things that really interests me is we talk about tradition. You're saying about like, the art form, and I think one of the things that I've found really, really interesting is if you look back far enough, in most martial arts, especially like ones that are over 200-300 years old, whatever they might be, you'll find that there's a closer relationship to how they were trained originally to often how a lot of practical teachers train them now, in the way that they're more holistic, they're less specialized in terms of, okay, so as an example, karate was often known as like the striking art, right? We were good at hitting things, we were good at kicking things generally. Even though like a lot of our kicks came from Zafat and they didn't actually come from like ancient Chinese martial arts, it was all from like a French kicking art, but whatever, right? The point being is that it seems like over time, like you say, like this artistic interpretation became more important, and that became the new tradition. So I think when you look at it, one of the things that I find interesting is that when you look at the relationship between what was originally counted as traditional, you'd be looking at like this holistic kind of style that would be all encompassing of striking, throwing, grappling, like probably some ground fighting too. And that's got quite a close relationship to that of like how a lot of practical martial arts teach these days. Like there's plenty of places that are like practical karate or practical kung fu. And funnily enough, they seem to be taking it back to this traditional, I'm air quotationing right now, this traditional approach where everything was more holistic and it was more about combativeness. And then, you just mentioned about art, right? And I think there was this kind of shift where things did become more of an artistic interpretation opposed to caring about the combative function of what you're doing, which is not a problem. The only thing is, though, is there then becomes different interpretations of what tradition means. Like, Ian always talks about this, and I've always thought this is really interesting, but it's like, when you say you practice traditional karate, do you mean the tradition of the 1800s, or do you mean the tradition of the 1950s? And I think when you approach it in that way, it's like, oh shit, like, what actually do I mean by tradition? Like, what is it, the oldest one, or is it the one that I like the most? Because I think that's where some people can be a little bit biased. Is like, no, I'm the traditional. I like train this traditionally because this is how Gichin Funakoshi, my Shotokan instructor, once taught it. But and it's like, okay, cool. What makes it traditional? Are you calling it traditional because it's what you like? Because you're like, oh, I like the way that he does kata, or I like the Kion Gumite, or whatever it might be, or is it more so that you're looking at it from like a historical point of view? Because I think, in my opinion, like I would look at it from a historical point of view. Like, what was, when you say tradition, are you meaning like the tradition of how this was first formed? I've noticed that when you look at like MMA and more modern styles, they are a little bit more, aka traditional, if we're talking about the tradition of doing things in a more holistic way. And I think, you look at MMA, you look at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and stuff. Obviously, they specify to the ground, but they do a lot. They do a lot of things. It's not like, here's a few techniques that we do. We specialize in striking. Let's leave it at that. Like, they do a lot more than that. Like, especially MMA, like MMA gyms and stuff. Like, you'll learn striking. Like, their punching is usually, they take it from the boxers because boxers generally have the best strikes. They look at the leg kicks and stuff. Funnily enough, comes straight from Muay Thai. And, groundwork is your BJJ, your stand-up look like grappling and stuff. I can imagine 9 times out of 10 it comes from like wrestling techniques and stuff. And when you look at that, it's exactly how things would have been trained traditionally. Like, your instructor would have been like, hey, I'm really good at hitting things. Like, dude over here, though, he's really good at grappling. So, like, go and learn from him. He'll teach you how to grapple, and then build that on to all the other things you're already doing. In my head, I think there's actually more in common with traditional and modern ways of training than we actually think. There's only so many ways you can hit somebody. There's only so many ways you can grapple with somebody. And I think when we start realizing that, like, you just need to make sure that you're training it in the way that's most suitable for you, in terms of like what is your goal, what are you trying to get out of this, then you're going to end up benefiting yourself more. Like you're going to be able to go, okay, well, I'm learning this because I want to get good at wrestling. I want to get good at striking. And as long as my martial art is doing that, I don't really care if it's traditional or not. All I care about is that it's serving the function of what I'm trying to get out of it. And I think the sooner you can like kind of identify that, the more likely it is that you're going to find the right instructors for you and the right schools for you. Instead of going, oh yeah, kung fu, cool. Like take a step back and go, okay, forget tradition, forget this mysticism that looks really cool. Does this school offer me what I want? Like if I'm looking for like a really good community, I don't really care what I'm learning. It's like great, yeah, these guys are great. It doesn't matter what we're doing. I'm having fun with them, and I think that's a really important part too. And I think that's something that's probably been around for a long, long time. Is this sense of community when you're training with a group of individuals that are interested in the same thing that you are. And I'm sure you can attest to that too, Pat. Like,
oh yeah, everywhere. I make no bones about the fact that I've done a lot of different martial arts styles in the course of my martial arts career, lifestyle, whatever you want to call it. And everywhere I've gone, biggest deciding factor has always been: do I feel homely here? Do I feel like these are a good group of people that I want to hang out with and I want to see? Because whether or not you're there for a martial art or whatever kind of hobby, the idea is that this is A, something that I like to do, and B, because I like to do it, I'm going to see these people at least once a week to kind of stand them. Is to be like overly pejorative about it. Are these people I want to see once a week for potentially the rest of my life? You know,
yeah,
and can I see them while still enjoying it? So I think it's really correct when you say it's about community more than it is about anything else. And I think looking at something and understanding, going away and going, is this what I want? Is this going to give me what I am looking for in a martial art or a self defense system or a combative system or anything like that? Is definitely the question you should ask yourself. And with the modern with in the modern age, I say in big old quotation marks, you can get on a bus, you can get on a train, you can drive the car. Just because the closest thing to you is a boxing gym doesn't mean boxing's the right thing for you. Because you might do 6 months of boxing and you might go, God, this is really boring me. I wish I could do something with a bit more flavor to it. And if you don't think to, it's as simple as just getting online and going, oh, I've got a really good foundation in boxing, but I'm just finding it a bit repetitive or whatever it is. I want to do something with a bit, I want to do something with kicks. I want to do something with a bit more of that. Then there will be, there's so many people and so many places who will point you in the right direction of like, well, if you just want to add kicks, then go and do kickboxing. If you want something that's got a bit more intrigue and flavor, but still heavy hitting, then go and do Muay Thai. If you want to do something completely different, then go and do Jiu Jitsu. It's like all of these things are so easily within reach in quote unquote modern day, and it's almost that thing of like in the old traditional narrative, it was like if you want to learn the ancient secrets of martial arts, then you did have to trek 200 miles on foot to the nearest Shaolin temple. So it was like, is that really how you want to spend your entire life? Because 200 miles in 8th century China was like, you know, you might not come back, quite simply. Whereas, if it's that thing of, you want to go and learn karate, well, you have to go and trek. You have to go the 300 miles from, you know, Nara to Edo to train with the karate master or whatever it is. I suppose it wouldn't have been Edo by the time it was karate, but there we go. You have to trek to the city to train with the karate master who lives there, because otherwise you will not know the great art of karate. Whereas now, we've got Google. It's like you just put karate into Google, and it's like, here are 3 clubs near you. Straight away, bang, done. Pick one.
yeah,
And I think again, this is where this level of like availability is also something that is in danger of losing the kind of traditional values. I'm not saying I want to trek 200 miles to go to karate every week. Don't get me wrong. But what I am saying is, obviously, if it's so, it's so easy to get something set up, then it encourages more people to set up, and then you are in danger of these kind of McDojo type things popping up, because it's just like, well, there's no karate club in this town. Well, I'll set one up, and people who want to learn martial arts will go, oh, awesome! There's a club within walking distance. I can go along, and you kind of get that kind of thing. Now, this is not me saying that if you set up a karate club in a small town, you are immediately a McDojo. I'm going to put that disclaimer out right now, because I don't want to get cancelled or attacked by people who do know karate better than me. So it's but it's one of those where, again, it all comes back to my favorite keyword, which is context.
Yeah.
The traditional martial arts, the traditional way of teaching is because you would be devoting your entire life to martial arts in 8th century China if you wanted to be a martial artist. So what is 1 year of your life? In modern day, that's probably a little bit disparaging, because not because you're not expected to live as long. Everyone is much more engaged in the modern age. I would almost say it's not a case of it was a difficult journey of however many thousand miles to get here. It was a case of I got on the plane and I flew to Singapore.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, it might be Shanghai. I'll have to look that up. I will look that up for next session, listeners. Yeah, it's very much, again, where do these traditions make sense in context? So to circle back to the conversation of like the Makiwara, does it make sense for you to have a Makiwara in your dojo? If you don't have the space for a heavy bag, then probably. But if you've got a good couple of 100 square feet and you've got a room in your dojo where you can put a heavy bag, then go for it. Do you have enough people that realistically every time you want to train, there will be somebody there to hold spot pads? In which case, you probably don't need a Makiwara. Do you want to be able to put the Makiwara front and center and go, come and train on this traditional piece of Japanese history? Then go for it. And it's again the context of, this isn't really going to be a conversation about is the Makiwara a better training tool than a heavy bag. No. But it's one of those where a heavy bag has different purposes to a Makiwara, as a Makiwara has different purposes to a spot pad. All three are used to strengthen and condition your strikes on paper.
Yeah.
And it's one of those where like, on paper and in theory, they all do the same thing. But it's why chefs have different knives. All knives cut. At their very core, a knife's purpose is to cut. But you have some knives that are slightly heavier because they need to get through bone. You have some knives that are slightly lighter because they are designed for more delicate work. You have knives of different shapes and sizes. To give you an immediate example, you wouldn't take stones out of fruit with, a knife that's 18 inches long. You're liable to stab yourself in the eye. And it's that, but at the same time, you're going to really struggle to cut through you cut through a flank of steak with a knife that's only 3 inches long. You wouldn't take a paring knife to that job. And it's the same, so it kind of comes back again to the whole thing of, contextually, all three of those items are just as useful as the other. You just have to understand the context behind why you have them. Coming back to the suppose the core of the episode, in the sense of the traditional values, you don't need to bow to start a karate session or an aikido session, or you don't need to do the salutation to begin a session of Filipino martial arts. But they all serve a very good purpose. They serve multiple purposes. They're keeping the traditions of your art alive. They're connecting you with the people that created them in the first place. They're denoting that this isn't jazzercise. This is something that you are devoting yourself to in a mental and almost a spiritual sense, as well as a physical one. If people do get spiritually involved in jazzercise, then I apologise for that comment, but I'm just saying,
the viewer base has just disappeared.
Half the viewer base is gone.
We're big in the jazzercise.
You can slander any martial art you want, but you bring jazzercise into this, and you've made a mistake, Sunshine.
I'll end you, mate. I think one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about that was the implications of saying context is important, and I think honesty is just as important. And I'm not saying this necessarily like honesty with other people, but like more so just honesty with yourself, as like, what am I training and why am I training it? Because this is a debate at the end of the day. Like, what's better, tradition or modern methods? And I think you talked about the context of it. It's like, well, why am I doing each of those things? But I think what can often happen, and I'm sure like yourself have come across this, I'm sure plenty of the listeners have as well, is people argue about absolutely everything about a martial art, and they'll be like, traditional way is better because my master sensei did it this way, and and you look at it and it's like, okay, you're doing that because you're trying to protect your tribe of people that you like, because this is your community, instead of actually looking at the facts. And I think that's one of the things that needs to be done more in martial arts. Whenever we're debating topics, whether it might be like, is this roundhouse kick better or is this one better, we need to be looking at the honesty side of it. And I think tradition or modern doesn't even come into the question. It comes into effectiveness for what you're trying to achieve. And I think if we were looking at everything in martial arts in the same way, by whether you're looking at like a kata, okay, like if you look at, is it effective for what it's trying to be? And but once again, it comes down to the context. What are you saying your kata is supposed to be? So as an example, then a lot of people would say kata is a way of strengthening the body. I would say it is mildly effective at strengthening the body, just because yes, you get into positions like, your legs might get a little bit stronger because you're dropping into things like horse stance, which requires a little bit of leg strength. Cat stance requires a bit of coordination. So coordination wise, I can see it. Like, if you want to strengthen your legs though, squat. It's not the most effective method of doing it. But if you were looking at it as like, okay, well, let's just say I'm contextually using it as a way of remembering movements and techniques in a solo form, I would say it's actually pretty effective because it's good at building muscle memory. On its own, combative function is shit. Like a kata on its own is bloody useless combatively. 100% useless, in my opinion. You're not going to suddenly like, I think this is what like some of the films, they romanticize it. And now, I saw a great video. It was like Michael Jai White or Jay White. I would always butcher his name. And I can't remember what film it was. And anyway, there was like a guy in a gym, and he was like, "I'm gonna fight everybody in this gym." Beats and
I know the one you mean. I think.
And there's like Michael Jai White in the corner just practicing a kata. And he's like, I want to fight him.
I think it's
that he was just practicing perfectly, like adapts to the moment. You see it like the flashback to when he's doing the kata, he's hitting the guy. It's like boom, 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 and obviously like in the film, I'm sure this guy is like more than capable of fighting as well. But like the way that they display it is like, okay, this traditional martial artist who's practicing kata will always beat the modern guy because he has this tradition of karate behind him or whatever it might be. And it's complete fucking horseshit. And it's the problem is that I think sometimes people can get caught up in this idea that like tradition is better just because it's traditional and it's old. And it isn't the case. And like I was just saying, with like this contextualization and honesty, you need to really delve deep into all of the things that you do in your school, and do they tick the box for what they're trying to be? And I think that when I say honesty as well, I think it's really important as instructors. And this is one of the things that I found is that, like you said earlier, it's like if you don't know why something is done in a certain way, or you don't understand the principle that it's trying to show, then first of all, being honest about it with your students is really important. Instead of going, no, it's just traditional, like that's less than useless to a student. But if you don't know, say you don't know. But then also, if you're doing something and you don't know why you're doing it, then perhaps if you've got the control, maybe you need to think about like either recontextualizing it for your students, or you need to think about taking it out of the syllabus altogether. Because I did this. I went through this process when I was starting CKS, and you look at it, and like one of the things that I found, like Kion Kumite, like, and I'm sure there's plenty of people in the comments that will be able to say, we do it and it's good for this and it's good for that. We do practical karate. We do a lot of grappling and stuff. We personally didn't find that the Kions had as much of a combative function as some of the two-partner bunkai drills that we already do. If anything, we thought the bunkai drills actually gave better principles than if I was to sit down and go, hey, we're going to do this like really traditional like two-person drill where this person exactly does this when this person exactly does this. We have to hit this exact stance at the exact time. Like, we just didn't see it as being functional. So we took it out of the system. If I was to teach it today, though, I would contextualize it. I'd be like, listen, like, we're going to do this because I think it's interesting, because this is something that came from like the 1940s, 1950s era of karate, and it might be fun to do. But I would also preface it by saying I personally don't see the combative function here. There might be instructors out there that do. I don't. So take that with a pinch of salt. I'm not telling you that this is the right thing to do in this situation, but we're going to do it just so you guys can see how karate used to be trained. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said context, Pat, because like to me, like I come back to it a lot. It's principles and context. And I think since I've been teaching that way and I've been learning that way, I've found that I don't feel as disillusioned by the mysticism of tradition. And I'm sure well, actually, I'm going to ask you. I was going to make an assumption then. That's not right. Do you feel the same way about the martial arts these days, based on the fact that you look at context more?
I think I do. I'm going to tentatively say I do, because so it all comes back to, so the immediate one I can pick on, and I will say picking on rather than picking up, is, unfortunately it comes back to certain things I saw when I was doing my Aikido training. Yes, unfortunately, Aikido, the most hated martial art on the internet. But it was like, so obviously a lot of Aikido comes from, you start a lot of the techniques, you learn them basically from the wrist grab.
Yeah.
Now, there's two ways, this is kind of a two-pronged example, because the first is principle. Obviously, we were very lucky to have Rokas Leo come and give a seminar for us, and he made this point excellently, which is like, you have it, so you have the kind of underhanded wrist grab, and if you do the technique from there, but like, what if somebody grabs with the hand turned the other way or from a different angle? All of a sudden you go, oh crap, what do I do? Because you've only been trained this one specific way from this one specific grab, and you haven't had the technique principle explained to you. As soon as you understand the principle behind the technique, you can do it from any angle, and you can apply it to a combative sense. Obviously, I know Ian makes this point, but I do enjoy it as well. Is like, there's actually direct quotation from the founder of Aikido, Ushiba, where he says Aikido is 90% striking. And if you go online, I defy you to find an image of an Aikido guy striking in less than 5 minutes. When you put it in context of the guys in karate, when it was being trained, the Okinawan children all knew how to grapple, so they didn't bother teaching you how to grapple because you already knew. In the same way, Aikido was something that was given to people who were in the army, who had practiced karate, who had practiced judo, who had practiced, Chinese martial arts or Russian martial arts that involved a lot of striking. You already knew how to strike, and now you're learning something more esoteric. The other side of that prong is, again, context. So it was, Aikido was developed at a time when people would still carry swords on their hips, whether that be, an officer's saber or a katana, or you had something like a fishing knife on your belt. And the idea is if you were in a confrontation, why wouldn't you draw a sword? Because that's a pretty obvious deterrent of go away, no, you can't have my money. And the idea was that as you would draw for the sword, somebody would either try and grab for your sword or grab your arm to stop you from grabbing your sword, and then the other guy could beat you up. And so the visualization of then understanding, like, okay, so as this guy grabs me, the way I bring my arm to my center to grab for the handle of my sword to then move means that if he's true to his intentions and he holds on to me, he'll come with me. I can then perform my nice lock or my nice throw, or I can cut him as I draw my sword, and then I can deal with his mate. But this is 2025. I do not have a sword on my hip when I go down into town because it's illegal, is the very short version. So when you train it from the sense of you're drawing the sword or you're reaching for the sword, then suddenly, this technique actually makes a lot of sense. And now I have a visual and an understanding of how this technique is supposed to work. Yes, it's very Bernard Manning movie to understand, to visualize the whole thing of like, as he seizes my wrist, I reach for my blade with which to cut his energy. Or, it's very much in that sense. But as soon as you have an active association image with which to go, yes, okay, so my hand comes down to my center line, and I turn, and I open up, and with this cutting motion, I lock his arm, or I throw him. Suddenly, that technique becomes a lot easier, and the principles behind it become a lot more self-explanatory, right? So yes, I do think that understanding something's principles is very important, and understanding what you want to get out of it is very important. And because of that, I don't think you can, in any good conscience, say that a traditional system is better than a modern one. Because as long as you are getting out of it what you want, then it's the right one for you. And it doesn't matter if it's been around for 2,000 years or 2,000 minutes.
Yeah.
It's what you're trying to get out of the system. And as long as you're getting what's right for you, you're doing the right thing. In the end of the day,
yeah,
we are not. It's one of those where if you want to learn something that's good for your joints and you're doing Tai Chi, don't let people tell you that, oh, Tai Chi is useless. No, because you're doing Tai Chi for the reasons that are right for you. If you're looking to get a bit active and get a good strike game and you're doing boxing and people go like, boxing's useless because there's no kicking, are you doing it because you want to do it? Then do it. It's one of those where we can, any martial art, you can sit and you can pick at its every single little bone, you can tear every single strip of flesh off of it, and you can pull it back and you can go, see, here are all of these horrid flaws in this martial art. It's useless. But contextually, if the martial art is right for you, if it's what you want to do, if it's how you want to train, then you go for it.
Honestly, yeah, I couldn't agree more, Pat. I couldn't agree more with that whole section you just said, because, like, I've met a lot of people in the years I've trained martial arts, and I don't think I've met two people that have ever had the exact same experience and the exact same reason for training. Like, don't get me wrong, there can be like a few like stereotypes of like people getting bullied or people that don't fit in. They want to find a new community that also has some combative function. You have people that are like, I want to compete and I want to win medals, I want to do this. And you might have people that just want to get out of the house and lose some weight and they just want to, be a bit more active. But, everybody has their own kind of personal perception of why they're doing things. And they'll also have their own level of like energy input into it. As in, like, some people want to train 5 times a week. Some people just like the fact that they can go for an hour a week, see the people that they like to train with, and then go home. And like you said, that you couldn't have hit the nail more on the head of just like, it really all depends on what you're trying to get out of the martial art. And I don't think you can criticize any martial art provided they're not lying about what they do. And I know I've mentioned this before in one of the previous episodes, but as long as your martial art's not telling you, we are doing this purely for self-protection, and then they do nothing that relates in any way to self-protection, then you've got nothing wrong. Like, you know, you're doing the right thing for you. If you enjoy it and you're having fun, then that is kind of the key. Like, I wouldn't be doing karate this long if I didn't enjoy karate. like I don't do it purely because I think it's practical or I think it's good at this or that or the other. I enjoy it. I think it's fun, and like I always remember, you know, sparring sessions and stuff where you're getting punched, you're getting kicked, you're getting thrown to the floor, whatever you might be doing, and I've got a smile on my face. And it's one of those things where, like, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but for me, it suits me perfectly. And I'm not going to let tradition or other styles that are more modern kind of tell me that I can't do what I enjoy doing. Like, don't get me wrong, we can look at tradition, we can look at modern methods, and we can go, oh, you know what? This thing that, like, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is doing is really cool. That doesn't mean that I'm going to be like, okay, we're going to change everything I do, and I'm going to do it exactly as the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys do it. But it means that I can go, okay, you know, I care about tradition, I care about, like, also progressing the art. Like, I can make small tweaks, small changes that slowly push the martial art further forward in terms of its functionality for me, because that's something that I care about, is functionality. But it also means that I get to hold on to the things that made me fall in love with the martial art in the first place. And I think that's kind of like the key for me.
No, man, I think you're completely right. Well, that is roughly the end of our hour. Thank you.
Summed up pretty much everything.
I think that's been a good chat, and it's always nice to get you on the old podcast. So,
it's a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Jack. Whereabouts can we find you?
Wow. You can find me on Instagram at Cotswold Karate School. You can also find me on our website, which is cotswoldkarateschool.com. How about you, Pat? Where can we find you?
You can find me again on Instagram at Good Medicine Martial Artist. And exciting news, don't forget to give us a follow at the new official Armchair Combatives page on Instagram. Armchair Combatives with an underscore between the two words. Come and find us. We will be giving updates on episodes, and hopefully soon we will be introducing new features for you guys to get involved in the podcast yourselves. So, thank you very much, Jack. Thank you, and hope to see you guys soon.
Take care.